discourses that focus on different things. There is a focus on personal empowerment, which is where a lot of startups come in, and also a lot of quasi-academic spiritual institutions like the Singularity University come in, which are all about personality, personal growth. But then there are also discourses about more economic, political, and social themes, which is where a lot of venture capitalists come in. And I think at this point, venture capitalists in America are what Gramsci used to call organic intellectuals. I mean, they're really the intellectual class of this new digital order, and they try to justify this new entrants like Uber and Airbnb, but also Facebook and Google, and they try to offer a rhetorical defense of the impact that these firms have on workers, nation states, welfare state, and so forth. Well, I mean, disruption would be the term that they would use, and I think in some sense disruption is the right term. In part because I think we need to bring back the negative connotations of disruption, because at this point it's just this nice, rosy, fluffy kind of everybody benefits, but disruption can be very violent. A lot of it is, of course, then trying to gather studies that can throw light not just on Silicon Valley, but also on various crises inside capitalism, with regards to the economy, with regards to employment, the real estate situation, and so forth. At this point, I think that there is a lot of confusion between left and right if you try to map them out based on current political parties that represent those ideas, in which case, a lot of what now passes for the left is actually what would before pass for right of center. So they're no longer defending the left. So I don't want to ping myself to any institutional formation, but clearly my reading is a Marxist reading, and it draws also on a lot of other thinkers and disciplines that are not necessarily Marxist in character, but at the root of it are concerns that are traditional concerns of Marxist left, which have to do with property, work relations, nature of exploitation in the modern age, nature of alienation in the modern age. Oh, sure, definitely. Yeah, no, I think they represent a useful rupture and a much-needed rupture with the current kind of consensus promoted by the elites. They expose the emptiness of the political project on which the extreme center is how I would call it, using the words of Tariq Ali. This is what rules. It's the alliance between the center left and center right, which more or less now share the same political and economic interests, and any effort to expose the shared agenda that they have, but also to oppose it, but to do it also in a way that calls into question the ability of the current political process to function. And France has really, up until now, been the weakest link in the Southern Europe and Mediterranean, where the hope was that, once things start happening in France, then, Italy, Spain, Portugal, Greece, and others can follow. And it just happened that in all those countries, things began unraveling much sooner than in France. But now with France joining, or at least it looks like they might be joining, at least in some way, this new wave of rebellion across Europe, which I support in most of its individual manifestations, I think it's actually one of the best news that we have received from Europe in a very long time. Well, I don't fantasize about creating my own movement. I have no problem lending my expertise and my analytical capacity to a political movement with which I share the basic intellectual agenda. So I see no reason why it shouldn't be done. In fact, I think that the only way in which intellectuals today can stay relevant is precisely by aligning themselves with certain political causes and movements and processes. Otherwise, the work becomes far too theoretical and disconnected from reality. I think that you have to reconcile the contradictions, and you reconcile the contradictions by making compromises. I mean, I have no problem using a lot of Google services for the sole part that I know that they make me far more effective in my other work than an alternative set of services that are free software. I mean, I know that, in an ideal world, I wouldn't be using those services, but I don't want to become paralyzed by ethics. And I think that a lot of people do get paralyzed by ethics. And there are a lot of people like Richard Stallman, whom I respect tremendously, who is not as effective as he could be, in part because he refuses to use a credit card, or he doesn't use a browser that has graphics in it. So that hampers and limits the capacity of those people to be effective. What I think must be done and needs to be done is to repoliticize the issues of technology and data and to put them on the same level as questions of commodification of labor and commodification of land, which have been the traditional bulwarks of the leftist project. Once we manage to establish commodification of data as, and the whatever new feudal model might emerge on top of it, if we manage to establish it as an important avenue of fight, then I think things can start changing. But ultimately, this cannot be solved by keeping this problem at the level of consumer behavior. I do think that the state level is important, and it's important to set the framework, it's important to run the infrastructure, it's important to formulate a data policy that will allow that data not to be sucked out by those firms and those platforms. So while I think the ultimate goal is the empowerment of communities and citizens, I think there are a lot of things you can do. I don't think that the easy way out, which is preached by a lot of people, which is obfuscation of data, is the right way to go. I mean, a lot of people would say, well, Google makes all those predictions about you. Why don't you just start hiding your data? And that way, you'll keep out and confuse them. I don't think that that will scale very well, and I don't think it ultimately presents a big challenge to Google. So in that sense, I don't think it's a strike. But to figure out what will really hit them, when you start talking about laws that will take data out of circulation and create some kind of a reservoir around it, so the this company will need to pay for using the data, then they really get kind of very nervous about it.